Today we're going to show you how to change the LCD on your iPhone 5. We give this one a difficulty rating of 6 out of 10 based mainly on all the small parts at the top of the LCD assembly that you're going to have to transition over to the new replacement part. Other than that, it's not too difficult. A couple of the screws inside the phone don't stick very well to a magnetized screwdriver, so be real careful not to lose them, and make sure you have a pair of tweezers on hand. You might have to dig them out of the phone. And also, something to be aware of is that the camera doesn't always center properly, the front-facing camera on the LCD, so you'll want to check that and make sure it's centered so you don't block any of the range of vision on it. And you can see here we have a nice LCD in perfect condition, but the lens is cracked. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to separate those two, if not impossible. So the best thing to do is just buy the entire replacement assembly. Here you can see I'm taking the SIM card tray out just out of habit. You don't really need to do that, but it's a good habit to get into. Down at the bottom, next to the lightning connector, you will have your two pentalobe screws. Make sure that you use the proper driver for these screws. There are other ways that you can get them out of the phone, but if you damage these screws whatsoever, and you will if you're not using the right tool, you will definitely void your warranty, and you may get the screws stuck inside the phone. And it's never fun to drill screws out of a cell phone, especially an iPhone 5. So make sure you get the right driver. They're only about $5 online. And what we're going to do here, you can see that because the screen is cracked, it's going to be a little tricky to get much suction with the suction cup. You can use your pry tool. We're not too concerned about damaging the LCD because it's already broken, but I always try to preserve those just in case. You can probably recycle them. So what I'll do normally is take a piece of wide strapping tape and just go across the front, and it's okay to tape over the home button because the home button is going to be attached to the LCD, not to the inside of the phone like they are on the iPhone 4 or the old 3G and 3GS. So just go ahead and tape that, trying to make it so you can get a good seal, and you're going to need a pretty heavy-duty suction cup here. This thing's really stubborn. Be real careful, just kind of block it with your other. You can see my right hand's pulling, my left hand's kind of holding the LCD so it can't move too far when it does finally give. And you can see there it just kind of pulled up a little bit on the edge. So once you can get inside there with your pry tool, just work your way around very carefully. You don't want to put a lot of stress on this and crack the LCD if it hasn't already been broken. And these things like to separate. It'll actually pop out from the plastic frame, that white piece that runs around the outside. So and you can see I actually hit the power button on accident there too. So just go ahead and very slowly work your way around. It's a very tight, very precise fit. So it will give you a little resistance as you're opening this up. And you're going to do it from the bottom towards the top where all the flex cables are plugged into the logic board. So we're just going to kind of lift this up from the bottom. And you can see we have, you can't really see all of them, but we have three cables that go in under a metallic panel. And then you've got your battery terminal also covered by these little metallic panels. And in this particular case, the screw in the center here that I'm about to remove now actually twisted out the screw underneath it that is the base for this screw. So this one kind of got stuck. And I'm kind of glad that that happened here so you can get a look at this. And if you look at that little sticker with the serial number right above the screw on the left, you can see they put it on sideways. So this phone, in my opinion, was put together in a rush. I don't know if it's a machine or a human that does it, but it is definitely one of the sloppier assemblies that I've seen on an iPhone. And we're seeing a lot of, you can see the base screw there is kind of stuck inside because they over-tightened the screw on the top. So not sure why that's happening, but I am seeing that a lot more in later model iPhones. It's kind of like they're speeding up production and not being as careful as far as quality control goes. So we'll set that aside for now and come back to that later. What we want to do is disconnect the battery from the logic board. I've never seen an LCD become damaged because it was live or because the battery was plugged in when it was removed or disconnected, but just to be safe, it's always a good idea to disconnect the battery before you do anything. And it's always a good idea to power off the phone before you disconnect the battery if possible. That's going to prevent you from having that nagging email visual voicemail password they're always asked for. Up here in the top left, I know the camera's kind of out of focus right now, but you're going to have three screws that hold this panel in, and this is where the LCD, the digitizer, and the earpiece, sound, front-facing camera, everything interfaces with the logic board. So you have three pop connectors underneath here, and this kind of has a tab on the bottom from where you're looking at this metal piece that locks it into place. Take it out, you'll see it kind of slides down a little bit, down towards the bottom of the shot, that is. And you have little tabs, and you also have this little cushiony foam rubber stuff that is very important to help keep the pop connectors plugged in if the phone experiences any impact. So if it gets dropped, a lot of times you'll see a lot of the amateur jobs, they don't replace these pads, and you drop your phone one time and all of a sudden the screen shuts off, and it's not actually damaged, it's just become disconnected from the inside. And so that's why they put these little rubber pads. And you can see again, they didn't really center the pad. It's really crooked inside here, so it looks like this one was put together in a rush. And what we're going to do is go ahead and disconnect the first two, and usually the third one will kind of work its way off here, but we've got these two and one underneath here. This is not my favorite tool for disconnecting these, but it is something that's not gonna, you can see the third one just kind of came out there. Not my favorite tool, but it does get the job done. And here's the replacement part, just taking a look at it. So you can see there's a lot of stuff missing from the replacement unit that we're gonna have to take from the old one. This camera likes to get kind of tweaked, so you might have to work on that a little bit and wedge it in there properly from the inside area. You see how I'm going kind of from the inside out, angling it in there. And so this is the replacement on the left. Let's go ahead and switch those across here. I like to go left to right just to keep track of things. And we're going to have to move the home button, this metal panel that goes behind the LCD, and then all this fun stuff on the top. And I'm not going to go too much into detail on those. I'm going to show you where they are, but there's a lot of little pieces you're going to have to move over, which kind of makes it annoying that these don't come pre-assembled with that stuff. But of course, this will help keep the cost down on the replacement unit. So we've got two screws that are going to detach this little metal panel, but it's connected to a flex cable that is stuck onto the glass here in the front. So you take a little bit of heat and you want to go under where those two terminals are, those little round dots, little round gold dots there is where the home button circuit is completed when you depress the button. Try to get under here with something that's not going to slip and slide or cut it or anything like that, and just be real careful because you don't want to have to buy another part if you damage one. Probably won't set you back too much, but it'll often slow down the process if you don't have one on hand. So once we can kind of work this bottom cable out, let me get underneath here a little bit more. Very carefully, again, you don't want to cut anything. This is a dulled razor blade, by the way, so it's a little safer to work with. And we'll pull this little metal panel out, and then you'll have your home button, which sits in a little rubber gasket housing is the best way I can describe it, and that has adhesive that's holding it onto the glass. So what we're going to do is heat this up a little bit. Don't heat it too much. You don't want to melt this plastic and get it all distorted. But once you warm that up, it should come off a little easier. Just kind of push from the front very slowly. Don't tear it. Go ahead and move this tape out of the way here. And just push little by little. It should pop right out. And then you just want to transfer that straight over, hopefully with the adhesive still intact. And it's a good idea to move the plastic off the new part before you set it in there. And you'll see here that it doesn't go in straight the first time. So if you try to line it up from the back, usually you're going to be off a little bit, and that little square that they print on the home button makes it very noticeable. So what I like to do is push this out and just kind of look at the front of the screen as you're installing the button. Make sure it's nice and straight, and that way it'll look stock and not like somebody's been messing around with the phone, twisting the button around. It's very distracting when you have a crooked button on there. So go ahead and put that in, and once we get that together, we can put this cable right over the back. And something to take note of, if you're having problems with your home button, there's often going to be corrosion inside this little piece that I'm putting on right now. So sometimes you just clean it up. You might have to replace the whole thing or clean those terminals, the little gold ones, little round gold terminals there. So we've got our screws we're going to put back in, and then we will move on to the metal panel behind the LCD. So here we're going to have a series of screws along the sides, one at the top and one at the bottom. These will all have to come out so we can move this panel over. And if you take a look at the replacement part on the right-hand side, you'll see a little red film that kind of covers the back of the LCD. We're going to take that off also before we apply this. And I don't know why I took those two screws out first. Those could actually wait till later, the ones that are on the earpiece. But go ahead and take all the screws out from the metal frame. And very carefully lift it out just to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. You can see I actually forgot the one on the bottom there before I started to pull it apart. But you'll notice real quickly if you run into any resistance that there's something holding it in place. So let's just pull right off. This part's relatively easy and straightforward. Remember not to mix up your screws. These are different lengths pretty much throughout the phone. So you want to keep those well organized if you don't know where they go. And we'll move over here. Go ahead and take the red piece off the back. And then you can install the panel. Nothing too complicated here. It's like I put the wrong screw in the wrong place there the first time. So that one actually goes down at the bottom. And sometimes they're tricky to get these things to stay on the screwdriver. You magnetize them, they don't stick. There, like I mentioned earlier, there are a couple screws that are made of some sort of alloy that just doesn't hold onto the magnet very well. So you might have to start them with a pair of tweezers or something, line them up first before you start twisting. So we got the middle panel on the back now. We're going to go to the top, and I'm not going to narrate this entire part. There's nothing really that complicated. It's just kind of a pain because there's a lot of small parts here. So you've got the guard that goes over the back here where those two screws came out for the earpiece. And then underneath here, we're going to have a series of cables and plastic plastic pieces, gaskets, just a whole bunch of weird stuff that pretty much locks the dust out and keeps everything lined up nice and straight. And this kind of peels back a little bit here, and then it's also got some adhesive holding it in. That's your front-facing camera there and your proximity sensor, all kind of in one area. And it's all attached to this flex cable that you see hanging off the assembly here. And I'm going to heat this up so we can get underneath that piece that's stuck on the top. Again, you'll see a couple of terminals right there, and you want to get under those very carefully. Make sure not to damage any of these. Get your phone all put together. Something's not working right, you probably cut through one of these cables, so do be very careful when you pull this off. And I do want to mention that when we get to the front here in a minute, you will see a big round piece there I'm kind of pointing to that goes, it's the dust protector for the front-facing camera. This thing is actually glued on to the glass. There's a little one here I'm taking off first. And these are kind of a pain to manipulate, especially since look like my tweezers were bent there a little bit. But this little plastic piece, you'll see, I'll come back to it in a minute, and it's just going to fly across the room. So the big one there where you can actually see through the top of the lens. When you get to that, be very careful and make sure you're in an area where you can kind of catch anything that goes flying, because that definitely will come off and tends to end up on the other side of the room if you're not careful. And here I'm just going to go ahead and push the mesh for the earpiece cover through the assembly, and it's got a rubber gasket here that I'm peeling off. Underneath that, another strip of some sort of material, and then you've got the actual mesh itself. So keeping that thing nice and straight is my goal, because I don't like to put an iPhone 5 together and you take a look at the earpiece mesh and it's all wrinkled. Fortunately, this is a very dark color, so it's not very noticeable from the other side. If you're working on a 4 or a 4S, if you start getting wrinkles in that mesh, it just looks like somebody poked something inside the phone. So I like to just be real careful about that. And I'm going to put some more heat on here, and I think I'm still working on the mesh at this point. Oh, now this is the plastic piece. You will see it's going to come out, and I wasn't watching what I was doing, and it kind of went flying here. Right there. Ended up on the floor about 5 feet away from my desk. So don't make the mistake I did. Be really careful and kind of cover that area with something so it can't go too far if it does fly out, which it often will. You can actually hold on to it with something while you're prying on it. And try to get it off in one piece if you can. If you break it, you can, if it cracks, you can kind of piece it back together, but you want to really get that off in one piece if possible. So here's the backing here's the actual mesh, and then there's another back piece that goes onto it. I wasn't having any luck putting the mesh in by itself, so I went ahead and attached it here in a minute to another little strip that goes behind there, and that kind of made it easier to manipulate. Try and get this nice and straight. And you can see it just doesn't really have anything holding it in place. You can always add a little bit of adhesive, double stick adhesive if you need to. But I found that taking this other piece that goes behind it and just sticking the two back together made it the easiest to work with. And of course my camera seems to be out of focus at the moment. Give it a minute or two and everything should clear up. All right, there we go. Now we can see what we're doing, and I actually had to leave the table to go find this little plastic piece. And it's very annoying to look for a transparent plastic anything, just because it's just hard to see on any surface because everything goes right through it. So I can't stress enough, save yourself a lot of time. Make sure you keep track of that little plastic ring that goes around the front-facing camera, as well as a couple other little pieces here that are made out of clear plastic. And these little things are really a pain to work with as well. And there's only one way that they're going to go in, but they just don't like to sit down. So it does take some time and concentration and a steady hand to get that all put together. But once you do, you can go ahead and install the flex cable. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because you're going to have to just kind of position this thing so that the camera is right in the center of that plastic piece. It doesn't like to stay in the right position for some reason. So you might have to add a little adhesive to that also, or put a shim up there at the top somewhere to hold it in place. But make sure you plug the bottom piece in first, get the camera centered, and while you have it centered, hold it in place and go ahead and put the earpiece in and tighten down the 2 screws, and that should pretty much hold it where it's supposed to go. But I will not guarantee it, because I've had these things just fight me all the time. You just kind of have to mess around with it until you get it lined up straight. So that will just come with time and experience. But other than that, the rest of this is relatively straightforward. You will see later on I come back and move the pads from the old LCD onto the new one, onto the new pop connectors, so that they will stay plugged in. Other than that, it's just a matter of putting everything back in the reverse order that we took it out of the phone. I don't know if you noticed, but on the top right-hand corner there, you can see that there's a little plastic piece that I seem to have left out of the phone. So I will probably go back off camera and put that back into position. Make sure you don't leave anything out. Looks like I got in a hurry on this one and neglected to put that back inside. And there you can see, as usually what happens, I take a look around and notice that there is an extra piece here, and that's got to go back inside the phone. So hopefully you don't make that mistake when you're trying to keep track of what's going on in the video and put a phone back together at the same time. Sometimes you lose track, but we'll go ahead and put this all back together and get everything screwed down. If you like, you can skip ahead to the part where I actually plug everything in. This is just getting all the pieces back inside where they need to go. Okay, it looks like I just finally skipped ahead there. Got all the plastic pieces back inside where they're supposed to be, and put our two screws back into the speaker retaining brace. I don't know what you want to call this thing. I'll have to look it up. So we've got the long screw that goes here on the top. The one on the bottom right hand corner is a little bit shorter. Make sure you don't mix those up. I've seen people put long screws in areas where they're not supposed to go and go all the way through the screen and shatter it. So you want to make sure you don't make that mistake. Okay, so now we've got the front assembly all in one piece. And all we're going to need to do now is transfer the pads onto the pop connectors. Well, unless there's one more thing. I think I backed this off a little bit just to kind of line up the front camera, most likely. And then we're going to start to plug this in and then realize that I forgot to put the pads on. So I'll go ahead and get all that stuff moved over. Use a little bit of heat if you have to. Fortunately, these are a lot easier to work with than that little thin strip that they have on the iPhone 4 digitizer, I believe it is. These are a little bit thicker. They're more like the 4S, so they're easy enough to get under and pull them off in one piece, and then you can just transfer them straight over. I found that it really makes a big difference if you make sure to line them up perfectly straight, because when you go to attach these pop connectors, it's a little difficult to see what you're doing because you've got your finger on top of it. But if you use the pad on the back of the pop connector as a guide, it will help you get centered unless they are not in the right position, in which case it's usually very misleading and you have a very difficult time plugging them in. So try to get these as straight and as centered as you can. It looks like I did actually lose a little bit of that one in the process there. But I think the other two I was able to get completely off the old part. And so be real careful when you're plugging these in. It's a little tricky to get them centered perfectly, but you never want to apply force. If you damage those pop connectors on the logic board, you're pretty much not going to have anything that's useful as far as a phone goes, because if the interface for the LCD is damaged, you won't be able to see the screen, and at that point your phone is pretty useless. So if you damage the replacement LCD, you can always buy another one, but that's going to set you back a couple hundred at least as of today. And you can see I'm really kind of struggling there because this pad is not centered. So I'm going to go back here and pull this off and just kind of get it into the right position so we can have a better idea of where this thing lines up. Now once you get these plugged in, you'll notice that the LCD almost stays in an upright position, where kind of like where I have it right now, but it wants to kind of fall down to the outside. So it's usually a good idea to kind of wedge something up to the where my left hand would be behind the glass, just so it stays in the upright position. I usually do it with one hand and just kind of work the screwdriver with the other hand, but if you have trouble getting the screws onto the driver and you need both hands free, you can just kind of put something behind there. It doesn't matter what it is, really. Another phone, yellow pages, bookend, whatever works for you. You don't need anything fancy. I've seen some people actually go out and buy a special suction cup just to hold the LCD in place, and if that works for you, nothing wrong with it. But what we're going to do here is not put any tension on the flex cable, so you don't want this thing laying down towards the outside in the flattened position, because that will actually usually cause them to become unplugged, or you can actually damage them if you're very unlucky. So you can see here, this is getting these screws onto the screwdriver can be challenging, especially this last one. It just doesn't like to stick. So I actually use the tweezers to put that into place beforehand. And now we're going to address this other little screw here that is stuck inside of the screw, which is the base that it goes into. And what we're going to have to do here is be able to hold on to that bottom half with a pretty good amount of grip. So I grabbed a pair of needle nose pliers. Mine are a little bit big for the job. If you have something smaller, this is not really appropriate, but it does get the job done. But a small pair of needle nose pliers, grab the base of this thing. Don't squeeze too hard, because if you force it out of your hand, it will also go flying across the room. But just enough to break the top screw free, and you can see the whole thing comes apart. And here's the part I'm talking about, this funny little thing that goes into the mid frame, and then you actually put the panels on top of it and screw into the top of this screw. So kind of an interesting thing. Not really a crosshair nor a slotted screw, but I usually use the slotted side, the Phillips side to get it started, and then the slotted side to tighten it down. And this one, you don't want to go crazy with it, but get a good strong finger tightening on it, because you don't want that one backing out the way it did when we took the phone apart the first time. And then we can go ahead and reconnect our battery and then set these down inside. Doesn't really matter what order you do them in as far as the screws go. There's only one position that these will set in, and it should be pretty apparent, but if not, you can always check on the video, see how these sit inside. This one goes right on top, and then as long as you keep everything lined up, I wouldn't tighten down any one specific screw until you have all of them started. It's kind of like working on putting a wheel onto a car. You don't want it to go sideways, so get them all started, then you can tighten them up. But when I say tighten, just barely finger tighten. You don't have to go crazy with these. And if you take a close look, you can see my front-facing camera is actually off a little bit, so I'll have to go back later on and straighten that out. But you're going to go in, wedge the phone with the top end in first. There are a couple little tabs that go into the top of the phone, and then you just have to kind of work your way around the edges. This is a very precise fit, and it will fight you sometimes. So what you want to avoid is putting a lot of pressure on the screen. You don't really want to do that. I'm just testing the digitizer before I put this in, because you don't have to take it apart if it's not working for some reason. But once you've made sure that the phone is going to operate properly, go ahead and work around the edges. And again, you'll see it actually took me a little while to get this put together. I've kind of forwarded through the recording, because it's just really tricky to get these things to go in straight and not get tweaked. And again, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on them, especially in the area of the LCD, because those are very sensitive. So just take your time, be patient. Trust me, it will eventually go in there. You might have to pull it completely out and start over a couple of times. But once you get a feel for it, it's not too difficult. You're just looking for the spot, like right there, kind of hit the sweet spot, and everything's lining up, and now it's going down to where it's supposed to be. You wouldn't think it'd be that tricky, but you kind of have to work on these a little bit. It looks like everything's back together. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please give me a like if so. Also, you can subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and good luck with your repair.